'tis the season to be jolly, unless your name is Anthony Albanese. The Prime Minister's New Year's resolution should perhaps be to spruce up the furniture in his new Copacabana coastal home, since it's now looking increasingly likely his days in the lodge are numbered. The latest news poll shows Labor going backwards in key areas. Victoria now a problem child for the party, with the ALP's primary vote in the state lower than in New South Wales and only a point above that in its worst state, Queensland. In Victoria, one of our most progressive states, Albanese is now no more popular than Peter Dutton. The Prime Minister's other trouble spot is New South Wales, where the Coalition's primary vote has lifted to 40%. The 35 to 49-year-old demographic has also turned against Labor in the past 6 months. Not surprising, given they're the ones most likely to have families and mortgages and struggle with interest rates. As the Australian's political editor Simon Benson writes today, any pollster will tell you that it is this group that decides elections. Indeed, this cohort were the ones to get Scott Morrison into power in 2019 before turning against him 3 years later. The polls do still show an even split between Labor and the Coalition after preferences, but at this juncture, minority government appears to be the best outcome Labor can hope for at the next election. And if history is any guide, minority governments do not bode well for either Labor or its leaders who secure them. A news poll from earlier this month found Albanese was considered by voters the weakest Prime Minister in decades, while Dutton scored the highest of any opposition leader in more than a decade. And looking back on the year that was, it isn't hard to see why Albanese could well end up a one-term wonder. Cost of living will obviously be the number one issue for voters when they do eventually head to the ballot box next year. And the government's failure to tackle this epidemic has really hit them hard. Labor has remained stubbornly wedded to costly and unreliable renewable energy and a radical green ideology that's left Australians struggling to pay their power bills, let alone $275 a year better off we were promised before the last election. Now, wouldn't that extra cash have come in helpful at Christmas? Instead, MPs launched a juvenile scare campaign against the opposition's nuclear energy policy. That's despite the fact that they're perfectly comfortable with nuclear when it comes to submarines. Make it make sense. This year, the government's also been distracted by the $450 million voice referendum and trying to mire Australians in harmful identity politics. But it backfired, as 2/3 of us said no to being divided by the colour of our skin. And in the most basic key test for any government, it's failed abysmally in keeping us safe, as about 150 immigration detainees freed into the community, among them convicted murderers, rapists and drug traffickers, managed to game the system and avoid monitoring. There were already plenty of breaches during the year from those detainees. Now, our leaders' failure to confront extremism and terror support has been well documented here on this network. The lack of law enforcement, its ministers' anti-Israel rhetoric, and growing hostility towards our only democratic ally in the Middle East have all contributed to record levels of anti-Semitism in this country, to our great shame. And on that, despite the fanfare over the formation of Special Operation Avalite, the Federal Police Task Force investigating threats and violence towards the Jewish community and MPs, where are the arrests? Why haven't we had any updates to what is a major investigation into a terror attack? We asked AFP Commissioner Reece Kershaw why, after 2.5 weeks since Avalite was announced, there have been no updates in the investigation provided. We asked why is it taking so long to make any arrests or any apparent headway in this incident. An AFP spokesperson told us further comment will be made at an appropriate time. In other words, these alleged terrorists are still out there, and the public has no idea when or if they may strike again. Now, compare and contrast our weak leadership with the crystal clear language of Peter Dutton, whose Hanukkah message yesterday was refreshingly and unashamedly strong. He wrote, "From the hate-filled mob that gathered on the steps of the Opera House to the firebombing of Melbourne's Adass Israel Synagogue, intolerable incident after intolerable incident has been tolerated due to a vacuum of political leadership." And he promised a Dutton coalition government will provide moral clarity, deliver strong political leadership, and act decisively to restore law and order. The distinction between the alternatives at the next election couldn't be starker, and the polls show voters are waking up to that.